Church. I'd like to invite Pastor Mike up to welcome us all and to open us in prayer. Pastor Mike.
Thanks, Cooper. What a blessing. We have Eric Metaxas here tonight, and it's an awesome privilege to have him here. I'm looking forward to all that he's going to share. Thanks, Neil, for putting all this together. And hey, I'm excited. I don't know about you, but when I hear the word woke, I think, what does that mean in Scripture? What are we supposed to be doing? And I read this. I just read this earlier today, and I just thought about it. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 14, this is what the Bible says about being awake. Wherefore, it says, "Awaken now that sleep, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give you light. See that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time." That means to buy up every opportunity. And you're doing a good thing by buying up the time tonight, by being here. I guarantee you're going to be blessed. Because why? The days are evil. Wherefore be not unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. And here's God's will for your life. Often people ask that question, what's God's will for my life? Here's what the Bible says. It's not to be drunk with wine, but to be filled with the Holy Spirit. God wants to actually give you a gift. It's not a scary thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a relationship with Him. It's as simple as that. And that's what it is to be awake. It's to have life. And that's what we're really here about tonight. At least I am here as we pray to encourage you to know that God is the one who sets you free. He's the one who gives you the light. And we are in evil times. And so that's why you're here tonight, to know what to do and how to vote. So let me tell you how to vote. No. It's pretty easy if you just pray. It's so easy. I mean, my 4-year-old would know what to do. So let's pray and let's ask the Lord just to bless tonight and that He be glorified, shall we? Lord, we just thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Lord, we thank you for bringing Eric Metaxas tonight. We thank you, Lord, just for, Lord, his heart for you, for just knowing history in a country that's forgotten our history. As I just even read today, the $6.5 billion coming from different countries, foreign communist countries that don't like you, giving them to universities to turn our students away from you and from what the history of this country is. Lord, we thank you for men like Eric who are standing up and telling the truth. And so we thank you, God, for the country you've entrusted to us. Help us to be wise, Lord, and to redeem the time and to understand what's going on and to know, God, you're in control, that we don't have to live in fear and that we can walk, Lord, with you today. We thank you for being here with us, and we ask that you would be lifted up, you'd be glorified, that you'd minister to each and every one of our hearts. And we thank you for the VAC. We thank you for their hard efforts and their work they do, and we pray that you'd bless them and that you'd continue, God, just to be magnified in our hearts and in this place tonight. I ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you.
All right, did anybody watch the UFC fight this afternoon? Nobody? But this is about when half the crowd goes, yeah, and the other half goes, what? So, that's a great, example of wrestling in the physical world. And then thanks to Pastor Mike and Eric, we're going to hear, a great example of how we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and against powers. And I was listening to, how many of you guys know who Leonard Ravenhill is? Leonard Ravenhill? Okay, not enough of you guys. I would hope all the hands would go up. He's a great British preacher and has done a lot of research and preaches a lot on the idea of revival. And he says 3 things are missing in the pulpit. And he says those 3 things are immensity, intensity, and eternity. And he also says that 2 things are missing in the pews. And he says those are integrity and honesty. And we so appreciate Pastor Mike for having the immensity, intensity, and idea of eternity always on his mind, and always preaching for us in the pews, of course, to have integrity and honesty. So great segue to invite you all to church tomorrow, because Eric will be preaching the sermon as well. And it's so great, Pastor Mike is humble enough to give up his podium for these great speakers. So we'd love to have you guys back in the morning. As I say, it's the finest church in all the country, because it has the most fines. All right, well, first up, we have a couple announcements. First up, I'd like to invite Neil Momman. He's the president of the VAC. He's going to give a little background on the VAC and talk about really whatever he wants, I guess. So let's welcome Neil.
I actually didn't know I was making an announcement until Cooper showed me the program. So, what am I talking about? Okay, well, let me explain. You guys are all, a lot of you don't know about the VAC. It was started in 2003, and basically our goal is to get Christians involved in legislation. So that's really it, and thank you. And if you think about it, God gave us his laws not to protect him, but to protect us. So just like there's a stop sign out here and there's a traffic law that says you stop at the stop sign, it's not out there to protect the city fathers, it's there to protect all of us, right? And when we break those laws, we suffer. So what happens when a nation breaks God's laws that he gave us? Well, we suffer. But who suffers first? The poor and the orphan and the widows. They suffer first. So it is of great importance for us as Christians to be involved in our legislation. Remember, we're not looking for a Christian government. We're looking for Christians in government. A big difference. So with that, I want to say that every year or every election year, we lose elections by somewhere between 3 to 10 million votes. And in California, somewhere between 500,000 to 1 million votes. And every year, even though there are about 60 million Christians of voting age in America, only 20 million of them vote. So what does that mean? That means we could be winning every election in every state, probably every year, if we would just get out and vote. And so you don't need to spend your time arguing with anybody. You don't need to, as I say, I love arguing with atheists and non-Christians and liberal Christians on Facebook, but really the focus that we should be doing is arguing with our Christian friends who don't vote and getting them out to vote. So we came up with an idea called double your vote. And what double your vote basically means is that you need to double your vote, find one person between now and the 3rd who does not vote, but is a Christian and believes everything that you believe, but does not think it's necessary to vote, and get them out to vote. It's easy. It's simple. You just need to do it. So please double your vote. And by the way, that was my wife's idea. She came up with that. And I just want to, I always have to do this disclaimer when I wear the shirt. You're like, wait, he's with BLM. No. This is the Christian conservative alternative to BLM. If you're interested, come out back in the, there's a table back there, and Daniel does a great job of explaining it to you. So thank you very much, Cooper.
Next up, we have a lady who, very interesting. She's going to tell us a whole lot more about that. So let me just go ahead and announce her, and then let her come up and speak. So we're going to have Paula come up and speak a little bit about Dr. Cody, who's the health director and the governor and all the craziness.
Well, I'm not here to apologize for them, but to fight them. So thank you, Cooper. And thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you today for a few minutes. So I'm here to talk about a community-backed lawsuit to actually fight back against the authoritarian health orders that we're all suffering under. So as you all know, the government response to the pandemic has been absolutely outrageous, and it's high time we started to fight back. We've all watched as the initial goal of flattening the curve has instead morphed into these increasingly draconian and ridiculous health orders, which have really hurt a lot of communities and are restricting our liberties. And this has stretched out from the initial days into weeks and into months. And at this point, as you know, Governor Newsom's reopening plan doesn't have a green tier. So apparently it goes on forever. So and right from the beginning, the fallout for the poor, the working class, the middle class, and for children has been very obvious, and it's getting worse every single day. Because the poverty, the misery, the suffering is growing all the time. And right from the beginning, the data from around the world told us very clearly, even before our lockdowns began, the data told us that the risk was very heavily dependent on age. That, for instance, for children under 18, the risk is actually lower than it is for the flu, and yet we've closed our schools. Even for working age people, the risk is really low. If you look at the CDC numbers, it's 99.99 something survivability, unless you're in the older age group, as you know I am. If you're over 60, then you have to take more precautions and you have to be more careful. But there's absolutely no justification for closing down society on the basis of this disease. So. And of course, as we all know, as ridiculous as Governor Newsom's restrictions are, here in Santa Clara County, Sarah Cody is even worse. She's even more totalitarian. So we really need to fight back, and we've decided to fight back in federal court. So we have... So we have just this past week, we have filed a federal lawsuit that challenges both the state and the county, but really the primary defendant is Newsom and his health officers, although we throw in Santa Clara County as well, but this is for all of California. And we are challenging their actions on constitutional grounds. So we've taken a broad approach, and we are making both First Amendment claims against free expression of religion, free speech, as well as 14th Amendment claims relative to the right to make a living, because people have been thrown into unemployment, small businesses are dying, so there are substantial 14th Amendment claims as well on this very basic right to, the liberty right to earn a living. So we know that some church-specific lawsuits have been turned back at the Supreme Court, but what we are seeing across the country is that federal courts are beginning to wake up. There's a saying that the Constitution may nap, but it doesn't sleep, and it's certainly been napping so far. We need to wake it up. So the approach we are taking is that we are using the Japanese internment case, the Korematsu case, as basically our poster child for what happens when the courts acquiesce in the face of massive government infringements on basic civil rights and liberties. John Roberts has written in a case a couple of years ago that the Korematsu Supreme Court ruling has been repudiated in the court of history. Well, the thrust of our approach is that if the courts let this continue, they are making the very same mistake again. Exactly the mistake they made in the Korematsu case. And the issue there was actually not racism. In that case, what the court refused to do was to question the government's actions under the military emergency that was in place on the West Coast. So it really was not a racism issue. They just said the government has authority during a military emergency and we are not going to question it. And so the parallel that we are drawing is that right now the courts are doing the same thing. Although states do have police powers in a so-called health emergency, the courts need to start to question the government's actions when they are as draconian and as ridiculous as we have seen them to be. So we're actually taking the rather unusual approach of beginning the framing of our case by putting the Korematsu dissent as a core argument. In that case, there were dissents, very strong and principled dissents. So we are using citations from there to say you need to look at it the same way, and you need to recognize that it's the same issues, and you made this mistake once before, don't make it again. We also have expert declarations from world-renowned Stanford epidemiologist Jay Bhattacharya. You may have heard of the Great Barrington Declaration. So he's written one of our expert declarations on how incredibly unscientific the approach is that the state is using. And we have a second declaration from a public health officer who's also very eminent and also at Stanford, Dr. Rajiv Bhatia, on the fact that the approach being used violates every single internationally recognized public health ethical principles, that this is not the approach that public health principles that are, have been adopted and used all over the world and accepted. This is contrary to every single ethical principle of public health. So we do have a small victory in hand. One of our plaintiffs is, even before we filed, one of our plaintiffs is Ritesh Tandon, who is running in the California 17th District for US Congress. He's one of our plaintiffs, and he's been prevented from campaigning for the last 7 months, basically. So we had planned a temporary restraining order to ask for a temporary restraining order, but before we even filed our case, when the government lawyers saw the case, they said that they were going to update the California blueprint, the website, to say that political rallies were going to be allowed. So actually, the update happened yesterday, and if you go to the Q&A, can I go to protests and political rallies? And it used to be just protests, and now it has political rallies, which is basically outdoor political gatherings of any kind as well. So we did, notch that little victory before we even filed the case. But it's going to be a long haul, and it's going to take effort and persistence, because whoever wins in the first round is going to be appealed, and whoever wins in the second round, it will be appealed. So, we are determined to take it all the way, because there's so much at stake. So as to how you can help, I put my email address is up there, and it's also on the flyers that we passed out. So if you email me, I can add you to our email list to send you updates on the lawsuit, and I can also send you a link to the legal filings if you're interested, and to the expert declaration, so you can read what we filed with the state. And since it's a public interest lawsuit, the nonprofit Center for American Liberty has created a special donation page for it. So if you donate to support the lawsuit, it is tax deductible. And the URL is on the slide. It's also on the flyer that we handed out. We are using a very top-tier law firm for this, so it is pretty expensive. So we would appreciate any support that you can provide. My husband and I have guaranteed the payment. The Center for American Liberty does not have the funds to pay for the lawsuit, but since we're in it for the long haul, we'd really appreciate any help we can get from the community. But as I said, we do intend to take our case, through whatever levels of appeal are available to us, because we really feel this is very important. And I'll close by saying this lawsuit is for everyone. It's not just for California, because if we can win a case, then it applies to the whole of this country. We feel that the liberties of this entire country are at stake, and that we really have to do everything we can to regain them. Thank you.
And I forgot to mention beforehand, but Paulette is very well connected in the Valley. She's been an executive at Cisco and Dell and a couple other companies. So it's definitely a big voice and big name coming through all this. All right, moving on to the tables in the foyers. So we have a couple tables in the foyer to take a look at. We have an amber alert, silver alert, missing, elderly, and endangered. All right. I don't have a joke for that one. At least it's not the fire alarm. Yeah. All right. If anybody sees an elderly person, let me know. All right. Noah, if you could put up the slide for the 31st. So next Saturday, we are going to be having a great Reformation Day bash. We are going to be having Easy from Living Waters. How many of you guys know Ray Comfort and Living Waters? Good. So Easy will be here. We will also have Josh McDowell, and I guess there's another alert. Okay, we'll just ignore those. We're going to be having Josh McDowell here as well, so it's going to be really exciting. We're going to be starting earlier. We're going to be come at 3:30. We're going to start at 4. Easy is going to speak for an hour, so we're going to have an hour. Then we're going to have an hour for the kids. We're going to have some people in costumes as patriots. We're going to have the high schoolers dress up. The kids get to go around and talk to them, find out interesting tidbits from the founding fathers. Then we're all going to come back in here for Josh McDowell. In the meantime, there will also be a meet and greet like we've done before with both Easy and Josh over in the cafe. So if you're interested in signing up for that, please go to the VAC website. You can see, or right there, the vac.j3ip.com. Dress in red, white, and blue. We thought it'd be fun since we sort of got gypped from not having a 4th of July. We thought it'd be kind of fun to do a 4th of July round 2. Oh, and the most important thing, I might be getting older, but I still love food. We're gonna have a taco truck, and it's gonna be awesome. So if you sign up for the meet and greet, you'll get tacos included. Otherwise, it's gonna be $12 a plate. If you're interested in that as well, I believe you can sign up for the tacos when you sign up as well. All right, tables in the foyer. We have TPUSA. We had Charlie Kirk here last week. How many of you guys were here for that? Charlie Kirk and Rob McCoy. So awesome to have them. So we invited TPUSA back. If you want some awesome stickers, awesome banners, posters, if you don't, have any wall coverings and you don't want to repaint, just get a bunch of posters and staple them up on your wall. Just don't forget to caulk in all the holes after you move. We have, we also have, Neil's organization, EBLM, which is the biblical response to BLM. We'll have those t-shirts out there as well, and you can speak to the people at that table as well. We also have Bethany and Anthony. They're going to be speaking on, or not speaking, they also have a table back there. You can't miss it. Has all the bright poster board. They're going to talk about how to opt out of sex ed, how to opt out of the teachers union, and how to opt out of the 1619 project. Or as I say, just opt out of public schools altogether, right? All right, how many homeschoolers in the room? Homeschoolers in the room? We all turned out okay, right? If you want to know where the homeschoolers are, we're the ones over in the corners all shy and don't know what's going on and all that. All right, I think that just about covers it. Neil is going to be coming up and introducing Eric. So let's welcome Neil, who is going to welcome Eric. For Q&A, do you want to cover? I'll just cover it really quickly. So for Q&A, Eric said he loves having the live Q&A. It makes him think on his feet. We also have security, so if you ask a question, no, I'm just kidding. All right, so he loves having the open Q&A. He's just going to roll right into the Q&A. So pretty much the next however long is open to Eric, and he's going to go ahead and run the Q&A. All right, take it away.
Well, this is a great honor. Eric Metaxas, most important of all, is a scriptwriter for VeggieTales. And he has some other things. He's also a New York Times #1 best-selling author of Martin Luther, If You Can Keep It, Bonhoeffer, Miracles, 7 Women, 7 Men, and Amazing Grace. He has written more than 30 children's books, including the bestseller Squanto. My kids want you to sign our copy of it. And The Miracle of Thanksgiving, and It's Time to Sleep, My Love. His books have been translated into more than 20 languages. My book has not been translated yet, so. Somebody translated it into English. My editor translated mine. He's the host of the Eric Metaxas radio show, a national syndicated radio program heard in more than 120 cities around the U.S., featuring in-depth interviews with a variety of guests. But his most famous guest is me. No, I'm just kidding. He was so nice. He invited me on his show 3 times. And the first time I was on it was the day before the election in 2016. Remember that, Eric? And if you listen to his shows, you will realize that Eric is a very, very funny person. He's got a great sense of humor. He's a great guy. I've had a chance to hang out with him a couple of times at NRB and stuff. It's a really busy place, but I got to get to, and then, so the Christmas, on my second show, I sent him an email saying, I know I'm coming on your show in a week or so, but I have this really Indian version of Jingle Bells. And if you know anything about Indian music, it's Bhangra, which is like, oh, ballet, ballet. So it goes like jingle bells, jingle bells. Anyway, so if you want, I know, now you all want to see it, come to our Facebook page. I'll post it up there anyway. So I send that to him, and within like minutes, he goes, we have to have this on the show. So that was my bumper music when I came on the show. So he's a great guy. He recently had a great debate with David French on if Christians should vote for Trump or not. You don't need to guess which side he was on. I would recommend that if you have Christian friends who are stupid enough not to think that they should be voting the right way, you should have them listen to that debate. Eric recently wrote a book called If You Can Keep It. I got to say this. So my daughter's not here, but I'm going to tell the story about her. So the first time I was going to be on Eric's show, I said, Mary Catherine, she was 9 at the time, and I said, hi, Mary Catherine, I'm going to be on Eric Metaxas' show. And she said, more taxes, more taxes. I told him this story on his last show. She said, why would anyone want more taxes? Now, this was 4 years ago when Greek was going through this horrible financial crisis. I said, no, he's Greek. She goes, oh, Greek, look what happened to them, socialism. And then she said, I bet he's voting for Hillary Clinton. I said, no. So she listened to the show and she said, yeah, he's not voting. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, give a warm VAC welcome to my friend, Eric Metaxas.
Wow. I should probably not say this, but I hate Indian people. I'm sorry. Yeah. No, that's not true. I just hate you, Neil. I do. No, I hate people with accents. It offends me. It's not right. Let me tell you something. What a blessing to be here. It's very hard for me to communicate to you what a gigantic blessing it is, how encouraged I am to come into a room of people who think the way you do and have some idea that you might want to hear what I have to say. Because it's not that way in my house. Yeah. It just means more to me than you realize. I want to say, praise the Lord. It just blesses me so much to be here. And it's a kind of funny thing because isn't it interesting, I think that the people who are really not racist feel free to say things like, I hate Indians and I don't like Neil's accent. But if you're like really afraid to say stuff like that, maybe it's because you are racist or you're so confused and whatever. All of that is not American, folks. In America, if you have any brain in your head, you understand that, of course, we're a nation of immigrants, of people from all kinds. My parents have accents, okay? Good American accents, not foreign ones. No, that's not true. That was a joke. My father, who's 93, praise Jesus, has a strong Greek accent. My mother, who doesn't give out her age, but she has a strong German accent. And what I love is that is America. The idea that we had two people up here with accents talking, whatever, I thought to myself, folks, that's America, okay? Because those people with accents, like my mom and dad, are literally as American as George Washington because we believe in an idea. It is not about an ethnic background or about what. We buy into an idea of self-government. And if you buy into that and you become a citizen, you are as American as apple pie, as Chevrolet, as Hyundai. No, just kidding. But I mean, it's an amazing thing. And the reason I start here is because I didn't really get this until just a few years ago. And I think a lot of people have some idea about me, like I knew all this stuff and then I decided to put it into a book. In almost every case, with every book that I have written, I start from a position of ignorance. And I say this because it's true and because I don't want anyone to think that you yourself can't learn what I learned. I mean, when I wrote about Bonhoeffer, I knew very little about Bonhoeffer. When I wrote about Wilberforce, I knew very little about. I just knew enough that I knew I wanted to write about them. But I do my research as I go along. But the story of my book, If You Can Keep It, I have to tell you, I was ashamed and embarrassed when I realized what I didn't know about America and liberty and how faith comes into it. And it was as a result of reading a book by my friend Os Guinness. Some of you know Os Guinness. You should have Os Guinness here. He's way older than Charlie Kirk. And by the way, I know Charlie Kirk very well, and he's a jerk. He's a real jerk, Neil. Neil, I take back everything I said. Honestly, what a jerk. No, I know him. He's half my age, so I can say anything I want about him. There's nothing he can do. Biblically, I could say anything. So, and he needs to respect me. But the point is that I forgot what I was saying. Oh, no. My book, If You Can Keep It, before I launch into Os Guinness and If You Can Keep It and all that, let me just ask, how many of you will be at the church service tomorrow morning here? So a lot of you. So I want to make sure I don't repeat myself too much. So, and I want to do Q&A here because we can't do that in the church service. So I just want to say this about Os Guinness's book. When I read it, he sent it to me and, flattered me with the idea that maybe I could read it and give him an endorsement. Now, you have to understand, I revere Os Guinness so much. It's like John Milton or Chaucer asking you for an endorsement, And I think to you don't know who they are? Yeah, they're English writers. And you're obviously not homeschoolers, those of you who didn't laugh. So, but I was amazed when I read his book because I realized that I, who, got a decent education and became a Christian around my 25th birthday, that I still didn't get this stuff. And so when I got it, and I'll tell you what it is, I was just so ashamed and sickened that if I don't get this stuff, how can we be functioning as a nation? What I mean is, when I said what it is to be an American, right, it's an idea. If it is an idea, then it means that the people who are Americans need to get the idea, right? In other words, if being a Frenchman, all you need to do to be a Frenchman is, not to bathe, for example. And now, is that appropriate? I got to tell you, not everything is a big joke. You should not laugh at that stuff. That's Francophobia. That's not right. But the point is that, to be a Greek, to be a German, you don't have to do anything. You're born there. That's your language, whatever. I mean, basically speaking. America is a bizarre thing. It's an idea. Now, just because most of the founders, came from England and blah, 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 it doesn't really matter. It's an idea. They came up with an idea that anyone can buy into this idea and govern themselves. But the idea had never been done in the history of the world. I mean, this is the problem, is that we take for granted everything we have. We have self-government, we have liberty, and most of us go, so, whatever. I mean, maybe not most people here because you're a certain kind of person to be here tonight. But I got to tell you, most Americans and most Christians don't appreciate the wildness of the idea of self-government and liberty, and don't understand what it requires to keep it alive. They don't understand that it's not normal. Liberty and self-government are not the normal way. The normal way is to live like animals and to have some strong tribal chieftain, the strongest guy, rule over you, and if you're lucky, he's not that evil, or to have a king or some tyrant or some group rule over you, and then maybe somebody plots and they kill them, and then somebody else takes power. That's the way it's been since the beginning of time. And that is the normal way of fallen human beings. So the idea that in the 18th century, some guys got together and seemed to think, we think we could pull something off that's never been done in the history of the world ever. Now, why would they think something like that? You have to ask yourself that, right? Because most of us don't, and we take it for granted. We go, that's just, humankind evolves, and we just get better and better, and that's what leads to the death camps and stuff, right? No. Why? Well, it has everything to do with the gospel of Jesus Christ, which you ought to hear in public schools, and you ought to hear about George Whitefield, and you ought to hear about all this stuff. You ought to get this background, but most people never hear this stuff. And especially if you're my age and younger, you just didn't hear this in school. Or maybe, there was a paragraph in your social studies book in 8th grade, and, that was that. And then if you had the fortune or misfortune to go to university like Yale University, where I went, well, you were sure that they untaught whatever you learned about these ideas at the university. Yale is the kind of a place where they were way ahead of the curve in terms of the woke lunacy. This was like in the 80s when I was there. They were like totally on top of this. And of course, now it's spread through. And if I ever had a dime, I wouldn't give it to them. And I have no, it's one of these things that all I can tell you is that these places are spiritually tremendously dark places. But I went in there like, an innocent. I had no idea. I grew up in a working class background. I want to tell you a little bit about how I grew up because it relates to what I'm talking about. But let me just say that my parents did come from Europe. My dad came from Greece. My mom came from Germany, and they met in an English class in New York City. Not a Chaucer Milton English class. You understand what I'm talking about, right? And to this day, they make grammatical mistakes, and I correct them all the time. It's terrible. It's really shameful. No, I just think it's so beautiful. That's so American, isn't it? They met in an English class in New York City, and they got married. And now, if you're raised, I always say this, if you're raised half Greek and half German, by definition, that means you will be raised Greek. Do you understand that? Do you know any Greek people? Okay, because Greek people, they know they're the best ethnicity. They don't mean anything by it. It's just a fact, and they know that. And they don't have any patience for anybody else. And so but they're very generous because they will make you an honorary Greek. You know what I'm saying? They will do that. Like and they do that just by saying, don't ever talk about whatever it is that you are, and we'll just talk about being Greek and stuff. So my mother, a good wife, decided, to convert to the Greek Orthodox Church and all that stuff. And so we were raised straight up Greek, right? So now the problem, of course, and I have a book coming out called Fish Out of Water, I guess in February it'll come out, where I talk about how bizarre it is to grow up in the Greek Orthodox community, grow up in that community, but have a German mother. Because at home, all the Greeks speak Greek. Of course, it's the best language, obviously, right? Euripides, Plato, whatever, they all wrote in Greek. The Bible's in Greek. Everyone knows it's the best language, so why would you speak in any other language, right? So they speak in Greek. But in our house, because my mother didn't speak Greek, my father didn't speak German, we spoke English. So I would hang out in the Greek, church, and always felt a little bit like a fish out of water. I don't really belong because we're not really Greek. My mother's German. We were kind of ashamed. To this day, I'm ashamed of my mom. She's not... She's just not Greek enough, and it's wrong, and that's wrong. You people need to change. So, but my father would joke around. He would joke around that when we had poetry, tragedy, Aristophanes, Euripides, your people were wearing sheepskins and living in caves. Like that. It's like, and by the way, that's correct. That's like 400 BC. That's what the Germans were doing. So he has a point, okay? So, but my parents raised me to love America. Now, why would they raise me to love America? It's very simple. Because they didn't start their lives here. They weren't dumb enough to think this is normal. They grew up in war-torn countries. My father grew up in Greece, where when the war was over, he didn't even get to go to school during the war, right? Because he was a teenager, and there's bullets flying around. It's a horrible scene. So he doesn't get to go to school. And he loses his father. And then after the World War II ends, the Greeks got into a civil war with the communists. So my father knew how evil the communists were. And he raised me that way to understand what communism is. My mother lost her father in the war and grew up in what became East Germany, communist East Germany. And she hated it so much that at age 17, she escaped by herself to West Germany, and unfortunately was killed at the age of 18. And they never heard from her again. That's even dark for me. I've never said anything like that before. I apologize. No, but my mother escapes at age 17. At age 19, her mother and sister, my Tante Eleanor, who I was on the phone with 2 days ago, they come over to West Germany to get away from East Germany. But all my relatives were in East Germany. So when my mother comes to the United States, and when my father comes to the United States, they are thrilled to come to the United States. My father only was able to come here because there was a massive earthquake in Cephalonia. That's the island where my family's from. I was literally there 3.5 weeks ago. And basically, because of that earthquake, there was a refugee quota, and my father was able to come here legally and become an American citizen. My mother's a wetback, but that's not true. You do not use that term. Listen to me. You people, you got to get serious. That's just wrong. No, my mother also became a citizen, but the point is that they raised me to love America. Because, my father, of course, raised me to love Greece a little bit more. I don't want to get into that. But the point is they raised me to love America. And so in a weird way, when I was among Americans, we moved to Danbury, Connecticut, and I stopped going to the Greek parochial school and went to regular public school and stuff. I found myself in this position where I thought, we're really Europeans, because everybody here that grew up in America and their parents grew up in America, they don't really get it. It's kind of weird. They didn't really understand like how great it is to be in America. They were like, what are you talking about? This is normal. And we were like, no, this is not normal. Nobody's trying to kill you. There's no communism. It really is a funny thing that my parents raised me that way. And I noticed it, that they had a particular love for this country because they understood what it was like to live in some other place. And I have to say that I grew up with that without even realizing it. And then, of course, I had the misfortune of going to Yale University. Now, I'm not really joking when I say that. It's the American dream, the working class immigrants to have a kid able to go to a place like that. But as soon as I got there, I realized, I thought, okay, now I'm going to learn how the cultural elites think. These are the successful people. Everybody wants to go here, right? Well, pretty soon it dawned on me that they think radically differently, that they had already, this is in the early to mid 80s, absorbed a kind of anti-American narrative. Patriotism was not cool already, right? And I kind of thought, well, that's weird. Patriotism was cool in my working class town growing up in Danbury, Connecticut, but patriotism was not cool. And that narrative that really gripped the culture in America in the 60s, right? It's an anti-heroic narrative. It's a narrative that basically says that we don't have heroes. We have anti-heroes. That in the 60s we started getting those movies with anti-heroes, right? That everything's nuanced, and when we don't want to celebrate George Washington or anybody because they're all flawed and they've all got, we kind of stopped that, right? Now there's something sick about that because frankly everyone is flawed except Jesus, in case I need to point that out. But the idea that you cannot celebrate someone who is flawed, if you find me a landowner in the 18th century, a major landowner in Virginia who didn't own slaves, I would say, go to the head of the class because they didn't exist, right? That doesn't mean slavery is okay. But I'm saying, if you're going to focus on that and not focus on other things, you're kind of missing the point. I think we established in this country a couple of years back that we're against slavery, right? 600 white boys died so that we could end slavery. 400 of them, obviously, were on the Union side. But the point is, we never kind of thought, when we say, hey, Abraham Lincoln, or George Washington was great, or we're not forgetting that they were flawed human beings. But somehow the narrative turned and we focused more on the negative side of things. Now, the reason that's kind of sick is you need heroes. You need to be able to look up to people. You need to understand what people have done. And I don't know anybody, as I said, who's not flawed. So if you're going to play that game, which is now we've come to see the real fruit of it in the cancel culture, that anything you ever said can and will be held against you and hung over your head like it's the only thing you ever said, that is the voice of the devil. That's the voice of the accuser of the brethren. It is evil to do that. I just say, imagine how you treat a kid. Imagine any parent with a kid, right? You say, well, I love my kid. Is your kid perfect? Well, no. Well, when your kid does something really wrong, what do? Well, a bad parent says, I do nothing, right? Another kind of bad parent says, I beat that kid over the head with what they have done forever, even if they stop doing it. I'll never let them forget what they did. That's a different kind of bad. A healthy, loving parent says, I will point out to you what you did wrong. I want you to repent of it. I want you to change. I want you to get better. And I want to celebrate with you when you get better. I want to say to you, attaboy, attagirl. I've noticed that you're not doing that thing anymore. You're doing that thing less. I want to celebrate with you. But a bad parent would say, you know what? You're just like your father. You're just like your mother. You will never change. That is cursing someone. Now, the power of the tongue. If you're a Christian, you understand. You can curse people. And there are people that have been cursed by their parents. That's the antithesis of love. Love is to call out a sin. You don't ignore the sin, you call it out. So the sin of slavery, the sin of Jim Crow, the sins against the Native Americans, whatever, we need to address them. And by the way, we have addressed them, right? You address them, you do stuff. And to have a war like a civil war, folks, let us not forget, that was an unbelievably violent, horrible conflict in which young boys died. We didn't turn a blind eye to slavery. We ended it in a war, and that doesn't mean we solved the problem. But, when you end slavery or when you do something like that, normal people would give you an attaboy. Like that country ended slavery. They had slavery, now they don't. In the British Empire, because of William Wilberforce, I wrote a book on him, they didn't have a war. They ended the slave trade and then slavery without a war. Now that's way better, but they did it. They did it. So you have to say to somebody who improves, hey, I got to hand it to you. I'm glad you did the right thing. You're not done, but I'm glad. Let's celebrate you did the right thing, and then we'll talk about what you can do next tomorrow. But imagine if you have a kid, and you say to that kid, you're never going to change. You're bad from the beginning. You're just like your mother. You're just like your father. You'll never change. You are cursing them. That is a deeply powerful curse when you do that. And you can do that to a nation as well. You can do that to a nation. You can speak positive things, and you can speak life and love and hope with correction, obviously. Or you can curse something. You can say, you were bad from the beginning. You were bad. Forget about 1776. You started in 1619. You were evil then. You've been evil ever since, and I don't want to hear anything about it. You'll always be evil because you're white. You'll always be evil because you're American. Now that is called racism. So a biblical worldview that comes from love is totally different from that narrative. And so I grew up in a country, in a family where they understood that when you come from a place like East Germany, where you can be tortured and killed for talking about Jesus, they have a clue that flawed America is still way better than that place. And by the way, my father comes from Greece. The economic opportunities here. He worked so hard, but he knew that if you work really hard, you can accomplish a lot in America. You can work 3 jobs if you want. You can put money in the bank. In most other countries, you don't have that opportunity. You wish you did, and you don't. And that's why people come to America. I talk to cab drivers in New York all the time from every country in the world. What are they doing here? Well, they're here because they can make money here and send it home, or they can build a home here and they can bring their family here. They can't do that in their homes, most of them. So my parents got this. And my father, with his Greek accent, do you not think he dealt with people looking down on him because of his accent? Do you not think he dealt with, I don't know what you call them, they're bigots, basically, right? And it was nasty people who hate foreigners and who hated him. He's told me stories. He lived through that. You don't need to be black or whatever. The point is, all around the world, there is evil, and it manifests itself in a million ways. But my father said, you know what, I don't care, because I'm going to work hard, and because my kids will have it better than I did. And that's what he did. And to this day, with his accent, he can say, look what God has given me in this country. And my father and mother worked so hard. My mother cleaned houses so I could go to Yale University and learn cultural Marxism. Right? That's America. So when I got to Yale, I started seeing what today we call this woke culture, and I was really kind of amazed. I thought, this is interesting. But I was young and dumb enough to think, well, this is the way the elites think, so I should probably go along with the program. I didn't really know what I believed. I grew up in the Greek Orthodox Church, and like many churches, they didn't teach me anything about Jesus, about the Bible, whatever. You just kind of go there, keep your mouth shut, do the stuff, get some coffee, and go. They didn't teach me, okay? And for a long time, I was very bitter about that after I was born again. And today, by God's grace, I'm bitter and angry about it. So, well, but it's kind of a funny thing because you realize a lot of churches, you go to church, you learn nothing, and then they send you off into the world, and you go to a place, God forbid, like Yale University, but most universities are like this right now, where if you don't know what you believe, if you don't know why America is good and exceptional and worth keeping and worth fighting for, and why these ideas are worth fighting for, you're just going to go with the flow because your friends believe a certain way. If you don't believe Jesus rose from the dead or any of that stuff, you're just going to be like, well, okay, I guess, now I'm here in college. I'm here to learn what's what. And it seems like he didn't rise from the dead, and that's what crazy people, in the middle of the country live. They cling to their guns and Bibles, and that's fine for them, but we're educated here, and we don't believe in that, right? So I kind of went with that flow. I drank the Kool-Aid. I remember one day, nothing's new under the sun, really, since the 60s. It's kind of funny. We at our college in '84 at Yale, there was the woke thing of the day was there was apartheid still in South Africa, right? Now we all know apartheid is wrong, and they had a thing about divesting the class's funds from South Africa, and everybody knew, oh yeah, you gotta do that. Now I had a friend who's an economics major who's liberal. But he said, that's actually not a good idea, and he explained it to me and stuff. And I thought, well, he just doesn't get it. I know how to vote. You better vote the right way. Well, the next day after the vote, the friend of mine who'd been manning the ballot box for our class to vote on this issue said to me, I said to him, very innocently, so hey, how'd the vote go yesterday, And he said, yeah, it was great, except for your buddy Chris Haynes. I said, what? He said, yeah, he voted no, or he voted whatever, And I'll never forget it, because the one thing I remember my mother telling me about communism was, everybody, yeah, they have elections, but everybody has to vote for the candidate. It's a sham. And I realized, that's what I was dealing with as an undergraduate at Yale. My friend, by the way, knew how my other friend had voted, which also scandalized me. I was like, what the hell? You know how he voted, and you're telling me about it, how you disapprove of it, and you're manning the ballot box? That's like communist crap, excuse me. Are you serious? I remember being scandalized at that moment. But being young and dumb, I got over it in 10 minutes, and I forgot all about it. But now I remember it as a moment where I thought, whoa, this is weird. Interesting, huh? Okay. Well, another thing happened. In my senior year, the cool thing to do was to move off campus if you were kind of one of the artsy types, and I aspired to be an artsy type, wearing a thrift store jacket with holes and stuff. You can imagine how well that went over with my working class, working hard immigrant parents, right? Why do you have a coat with holes in it, Eric? We can afford to buy you a coat now, so. But I aspired to be cool, so I lived off campus, and while I was living off campus, a friend of mine. And again, I was kind of hanging with the sort of woke crowd. They didn't talk too much about politics, but they were in the arts and literature and stuff. If you're in hard science, if you're like a nerd, you avoid this junk because you're just doing science or whatever, although that's changing too. But at the time, the literature and the arts, whatever. So this friend of mine had a sister. Now get this, right? He was raised in a kind of a wealthy New York family, okay? And his sister, this is 1983, she did a semester in Moscow. Now that's when it was still the United Soviet Socialist Republic. This was still the Soviet Union, okay? So to be the really cool anti-Reagan thing to do among the woke people was to do a semester in Moscow, right? And in economics. So she comes back, and these really generous communists have given her a ton of propaganda posters for free to distribute to her stupid woke friends in the West. And so my friend has a ton of these beautifully designed, Soviet-style posters and stuff, and says, hey, if you guys want any of these, whatever. And I was like, oh, cool, free poster, cool, right? I was living on hot dogs. That was giving me money. And so, wow. So I picked one of Lenin, of Vladimir. It was just kind of a cool thing, and I put it on my door, in my closet in the off-campus house. Well, one day my parents come to visit. Exactly. And I remember my father, at some point he sees it, and he says, Eric, where did you get that from? And I said something, whatever. And then he says, well, can I have a word with you? Now, my father is not like a Robert Young, fathers knows best, can I have a word with you, son? He's not that kind of a father. But this was so horrible to him that he became that way. That he said, I need to have a word with you. And so he takes me to the room and he says, that poster, but I want you to do me a favor. This is the man working his tail off so I could go to this university. He says, I want you to do me a favor. Would you do me a favor? Would you take that poster down for me? And it was as if the scales fell from my eyes. I realized what I had done. I realized how stupid. How could you be that stupid to be raised by these parents and then to forget all about that stuff and to put a poster of Lenin up? You might as well put a poster of Satan or Adolf Hitler. I mean, it's unbelievable how stupid young people, no offense, can be. Because I was a young person and I didn't know any better. I was that dumb, but I'll never forget how ashamed I felt when my father asked me, would you do me a favor? Would you take that down? So those are two moments that I remember. But you know what, folks? I still kind of drifted along. And it was not until I found Jesus around my 25th birthday that everything changed for me. And even then, it didn't change instantly. Now, what was important changed instantly. I was born again and everything. But it takes time for your worldview to change. And sometimes, in many cases, unfortunately, the worldview of a born-again believer does not change or can change for the worse, as we now can see, right? People are not connecting all the dots. So I got saved. I still voted for Dukakis. I had to because he was Greek. And I was still excited as a Democrat to vote for Jesse Jackson to be the first black president in the primaries. I was so excited. Now, I look back on it now and I think to myself, it's kind of interesting because my thinking hadn't really caught up with what God had done in my life. But eventually, I would like to think that it did. But I'm here to tell you that as recently as like 6 or 7 years ago when I read this book by Os Guinness, I still didn't get basic stuff because it's not in the culture. And unfortunately, it's really not in most churches either. And it ought to be in both places. I'll talk about this tomorrow morning, but the relationship between faith and freedom is not just like a rah-rah, people who live in Texas love guns, love freedom, and they love church. It's not just coincidental. There is a deep connection between American-style self-government, liberty, and the good news of Jesus Christ. And I never knew that. Now, the fact is, you don't need to be a Christian to understand this stuff. But people like Ben Franklin, who was not a theologically orthodox Christian, nonetheless noticed that when people got religion, when people got Jesus, when George Whitefield preached up and down the 13 colonies and revival broke out, all the time the same thing happened. Crime went down. Domestic abuse went down. Alcoholism went down. What happened? And you don't even need to care why. You just observed it like a sociologist. You say, when people get crazy about Jesus, their ability to govern themselves goes up. They're able to be virtuous. They don't need big government telling them what to do and what not to do. And that's an idea called freedom, liberty, self-government. I never really understood that idea, right? To govern yourself, to have self-government, you need to be able to govern yourself. Why would you govern yourself? Because you answer to a higher authority. I don't need somebody to pull a gun on me to keep me from stealing. I don't steal because God doesn't want me to steal, and I want to please God. I do what I do or don't do, theoretically, hopefully, because I want to praise God, because I want to serve God, not because the government is forcing me to do it. Now, if the government is forcing you to do it, you're not free. And the founders understood this. I'll talk about this more tomorrow, but Os Guinness called it the golden triangle of freedom. He says, freedom, self-government, requires virtue. All of the founders, every one of them, even the French Enlightenment deists like Jefferson, they all got this. There was none of them that thought it was possible to have self-government and liberty that they were proposing without virtue. Not one of them thought it was possible. They knew only a virtuous people could handle this. Everyone knew it. There's a couple of famous quotes, but I've got others in my book if you can keep it. I mean, it's like they all got this. And then they also got, like sociologists, whether they're Christians or not, most of them were, but they understood that, by the way most people get that virtue thing that you need for liberty is from faith, period. They knew it. They saw it. And so even if you don't have faith, if you're living in a culture where a lot of people do, you kind of pick up that culturally speaking. It becomes the habits of the heart. This is the way we act in this town or in this state or whatever. And the founders all understood that unless you have robust expressions of faith, unless you have virtue, you cannot have liberty. But then imagine figuring the whole thing out and thinking, well, hey, if we need virtue and faith, why don't we just legislate that? Why don't we just force people to have faith and go to church, right? Well, you realize that you can't do that. You realize you cannot force people to have actual faith. You can force people to have fake faith because that's what they had escaped in Europe. They had all fled Europe because in Europe, if you lived in this country or that country or this principality or that principality, you were forced by the leaders to attend that church and not that church. And if you attended that church, you'd be persecuted, sometimes horribly. They didn't figure out the whole religious liberty thing just because Luther was leaning in that direction. It didn't happen instantly. But in America, they began to figure this out. And by the time 1776 comes along, they understood we need to make religion utterly free. We cannot force religion. The church has to be free. People have to be free. In fact, and this is the price of freedom. Freedom means you have the freedom to screw up. You have the freedom to do it all wrong. But that's the price of freedom, right? In other words, if the government forces you to go to church, most people are going to go to church or they're going to do what they need to do, but they're not in it. They're not into it. They just do it because they have to. If you want people who live out their faith and exhibit virtue because they believe their faith, it has to come from them. Now, the government, there's some ways the government can encourage it, but there's no way the government can force it. So faith must be free. And that is why the founders understood that at the heart of this way of life has to be religious liberty, where the government takes no particular interest. Now, we always talk about they can't be the establishment of religion, right? We all heard that. It means that they can't establish a certain religion in a certain state or a certain town or whatever. Well, you understand that we're now encountering a world where our governmental leaders and our cultural leaders, they're playing games with this because they say, well, you know, that Jesus stuff, that's a religion, but atheism and agnosticism is not a religion. Well, I'm here to tell you that whenever you are coming down on issues that are of ultimate concern, issues of sexuality, issues of marriage, issues of the human body, issues of the human person, whenever you're dealing with that stuff, you're dealing with religious issues, let's face it. And so if the government starts saying that we are going to establish this way of thinking, they have to be really, really careful. Are they encroaching on someone's religious liberty? And it would be no different than if the government forces everybody to go to church. That's not fair to everybody who's not a Christian, who's not a member of that denomination. So we have to think objectively. When we care about these things, it's not because we care about Christians, right? I mean, it's okay to care about ourselves, but let's get this right. It's about what is right for everybody. It's not about what's right for us. So even though we need to be angry when a governor or anybody overreaches and fundamentally, clearly doesn't understand any of this stuff, we need to push back hard when they do that, because we the people, we are the government, and we need to get that stuff. There's no question about that. So when it comes to issues in the churches and so on and so forth, we need to push back hard. But I'm telling you, we're not doing it for us. We're doing it because it's right, because that kind of stuff is fundamentally un-American. Fundamentally un-American. If a group of people want to worship a block of stone someplace, it's none of our business. If a group of people want to raise their kids in a certain way, it's none of our business. That is called freedom. And some of those people will raise their kids wrong, and it's none of our business. That's the price of freedom. We need to respect freedom. People have the freedom to say and think stupid, wrong things. Do you understand? That's what freedom is. So if you believe certain things in your church and people think, well, you're a bunch of idiots, you know what? That's completely fine. You have the freedom, which was earned by the blood of patriots, to believe anything you like, whether they think it's stupid or they approve of it. It's none of their business. That's called freedom on the American model. And if we don't understand how this stuff works, we are going to allow our leaders to oppress us and to treat us in such a way that we're not free. And once that happens, it's not just that we suffer. Freedom itself suffers, and everything goes downhill. You lose the republic. I'll talk about this more in the morning, but basically, it was Franklin who said to Mrs. Powell after they have the Constitutional Convention, she says, what have you given us, Dr. Franklin, a monarchy or a republic? He says, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. If you, the people, can keep it. Now, if you want to be oppressed, if you want to live in a tyrannous situation, if you want to have a big government over you, you don't have to do anything except what they tell you. You don't really have no responsibilities except what they tell you to do. But if you want to be free, you have some responsibilities. You have the responsibility to teach these things to your children, to learn these things yourself. And so when I learned these things and I wrote that book, I just thought, no wonder we are where we are in America, because for 50 years, we have not been teaching these things. We've not been teaching why this American idea of freedom is beautiful. It's exceptional. And the most exceptional thing about it is it's not self-serving. We would love to, and we have, shared these ideas with the whole world. And by the way, we would love our economic freedom to be such that we would get so rich that we could let anybody in and pay for everything. We can't. But the reason we don't is because we can't, not because we don't want to. We would love everyone to be an American, to assimilate, to fall in love with these ideas of liberty. But obviously, we have to understand how this works. And we have to understand that God did not bless us with these things here in America for us. Now, He loves us, and He wants to bless us, but you know and I know that whenever God blesses you, He blesses you to be a blessing. That's biblical, right? Now, not every American conservative will get that, but every Christian better get that. You are blessed to be a blessing. If God has given you freedom or treasure or good looks or whatever the heck He gave you, He didn't give it to you for you. He gave it to you so that you would use it for His purposes to bless others. And this nation has been so outrageously, unprecedentedly blessed that we have an obligation to the rest of the world, because we're that shining city on a hill. We don't exist for ourselves. We are shining so that others will see it, and they will say, what is that? I want that. I want that kind of freedom. I want to go there. And if I can't go there, I want to take those ideas and I want to bring those ideas here. I want my children to have those opportunities. I want my children to have freedom and opportunity. And folks, that is what is exceptional. And what I find funny about it is it's the opposite of boasting. It's to say that these beautiful ideas, which we didn't come up with, which we've been blessed to get free, like you get the good news of Jesus Christ for free. You can't say, I'm a Christian, and you're not, and you're an idiot. If you know these things, you have the humility to understand it's a gift you don't deserve, right? And that's just God's principle, and it applies to the blessings, not just the ultimate blessing of faith in Jesus, but it applies to every blessing, including the freedoms we have in this country. And the Lord wants us to use these blessings while we have time, while we are still here, for his purposes. And we don't know how it's going to turn out. But let me tell you something. If you don't fight, and if you don't do everything you can do, God will judge that. You might get saved, but it doesn't mean everything you do is okay. We have responsibilities. We've been blessed so outrageously that we have the responsibility first to stand up for these ideas in this culture and to push back as hard as we can against any foolish government official who does not understand this stuff. When I heard Senator Feinstein say to Amy Coney Barrett a few years ago, the dogma lives loudly within you, right? In other words, basically saying like, hey, you know, we got the set of rules in the Constitution, you're a Catholic Christian, you're really into that, and I don't think that's consonant with being able to apply the law. Like, that is a level of ignorance that is so staggering in an octogenarian senator of the United States of America. If you want to know how far we have come from where we have once were to where we are now, that an octogenarian senator, this is not a state senator who's 30 years old and stupid. This is an 80-something-year-old U.S. senator who doesn't understand religious liberty, who doesn't understand that most of the people who came up with the Constitution and who have applied the Constitution for 240-something years have been living with strong dogma like Amy Coney Barrett. She didn't know that. And that's a sign to us, folks, of how far we have drifted. It's not a young, dumb kid who just got into office and they're like, oops, I screwed up. No, this is someone, if she doesn't know better, we need to do some work. And we need to vote, obviously, but we need to take whatever videotape. I assume there's a videotape here that'll be online. I will share it. We need to share these things like crazy because the hour is short. And I will just conclude with this, and then we'll have some Q&A. But the reason I'm so hopped up about this is because I realize that if we allow this country to take one step in the direction of third world corruption, you know, you wash my back, I wash yours, one step in the direction of socialism, one step in the direction of not understanding religious liberty, one step, we go off the cliff. That's how bad things are. In 1980, it wasn't like this. If you voted for somebody else, whatever, you know, I voted for Dukakis, we got over it. But can I tell you something? We're not there anymore. We've run out of room. We've run out of gas. We're on fumes. And we need to understand what is at stake right now. And I'm just here to tell you that don't do it for yourself. Do it for your kids. Do it for your grandkids. Do it for the urban poor who need to live in a country where instead of getting handouts, they get actual opportunity so they can have dignity. If you believe Black Lives Matter, you better know that the organization Black Lives Matter doesn't give a damn about black lives and that their policies are going to destroy black lives. So you can virtue signal and say, yeah, I'm cool with that organization and I got that, you know, on my porch, Black Lives Matter, yeah, I'm cool, I'm down. Or you could actually do what God sees you doing and care about black lives by doing the right thing, by voting for such policies that are actually going to bless people in those communities that have been devastated for 50 years by democratic policies. I have to tell you, it is horrifying. I really think there's enough evidence now that tons of folks in those communities are waking up and understanding we've been taken for granted. This is not right. But the bottom line is the church has to lead. The church has to lead. Everything I said about faith and virtue, that's the church, folks. If we are alive to that and we live that out and we push back, we don't let the government get away with that stuff. Why? Just because we want to fight? No, because it is wrong. It is wrong. It hurts people. It will hurt unborn people. And I'm not talking about abortion. I'm talking about future lives will be devastated compared to what they could be if we do not speak up and do everything we can possibly do at this season. So let's have some fun Q&A. There are the microphones. The microphones are all the way in the front. It means you got to do the perp walk. I apologize for that. I would have put the microphones halfway back. And I will answer any questions, but they have to be true or false questions. Go ahead. I'm kidding. That's a joke. That's a joke.
I would love to know your take on why the heck is the church so quiet these days, and what needs to happen in order to wake them up?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. I mean, the bottom line, I mean, you can phrase it 1,000 ways, but it's bad theology, okay? Now, I'm not like a big theologian, but it's bad theology. What the gospel says is different from what a lot of Christians have practiced through history. For example, going back to Bonhoeffer, okay, they all had this big Romans 13 idea that, well, whatever the government says, we got to do it, you know, because the church and the state, they didn't have separation of church and state, and the state was good, it was a Christian state, and whatever, so there's like whatever the state says, but whoopsie daisy, Hitler is now the head of the state, so you might have to rethink that, right? Bonhoeffer rethought it. But most of the people in the pews and most of the pastors didn't get it. They didn't understand that the church has a responsibility to speak against the state, that there's a price. Now, it cuts both ways because, you know, today you have two kinds of ways to get it wrong in the church, right? You have people that are woke. So what that really means is they do not have a biblical worldview. They're deeply confused about some issues. They want to talk about like their pet thing, whatever it is, environmentalism or racism, whatever. Like, hey, these are real things, but you've got to focus on the Jesus way of dealing with everything. And if you get all stuck on that, you know, and we've lost a lot of people to that, and it's gruesome. I mean, there are churches all over America, you know, putting up like rainbow flags, and they're putting up BLM stuff and whatever. And it reminds me of the church in Germany in the 30s, where way before the death camps, they were all putting swastikas out there. Why? Because they're like, hey, we don't want you to bother us. We're cool. Don't burn us down. Stormtroopers or whatever, don't bother us. They kind of want to go along to get along. They just want to, you know, pay their blood money and put up the flag. Now, you know, it's okay. We're called to love people that are different from us. We're called to love people in a gay lifestyle and stuff like that, but that's different from saying we approve of that idea, because if you do that, you're hurting people. And so you've got woke people that are doing that, and again, people can do whatever they want to do, but if you want to be a Christian, you know, you don't get a choice on that. God has a certain view of sexuality and certain basic things, and so that's kind of the woke thing. But then you have people on the other side, and in Germany it was exactly the same. You had conservatives and liberals both not getting it. And the conservatives are people that I revere, like John Piper just wrote an article, which to me, you know, it just proves that you could be that brilliant and still miss important things. And the way I see it, it's the opposite of kind of the liberal woke thing. It's the conservative pietistic thing, right? Like, I'm way too holy, like, to vote for that guy, you know? And I don't want to dirty my hands. And so to be pure and justified before God, I'm going to let everything go to hell, and I'm going to be thrilled when it goes to hell, because then I can preach my gospel and we'll all be persecuted and the end will come. If that's what God wants, I'm all in, but I don't think that's what God wants. And so people have this idea, and the Germans had it too. They were like, you know what? I'm such a serious Christian that if a Gestapo guy comes and says, are you hiding a Jew in your basement? I would say, oh, I can't lie. I want to be justified before God. I want to be pure. So please, yes, I'm hiding a Jew. Come kill the Jew, and I'll be justified before God. And I'm wonderful because I'm a real Christian. That's kind of conservative, pietistic, wrong-headed theology. And on the other side is the woke theology. We have the same thing happening in the church today, which blows my mind. When I wrote my Bonhoeffer book, I knew that it was a prophetic thing. I didn't think of it. I told you, I never get these brilliant ideas, and I just do something, and then as I'm doing it, I realize, holy cow, this is something is, you know. So 10 years ago, that book came out, and to me, if you read it now, it's a stunning thing, because you see these things, you think, oh, it'll never happen in America. Well, it won't happen the same way. But why? Or what, do we think we're better than the German Christians were? We are just as susceptible to those things. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to share something. My parents had accents too. So,
Shame on them.
yes.
They should speak like good Americans.
Both my parents came here from Italy.
Yeah.
And so I know what it is and I understand my parents were so poor, my mom would wash clothes in the creek in her hometown. And my dad, you said your parents couldn't go to school, your dad couldn't go to school. My dad couldn't go to school because he had no shoes to wear. So that, or books, because they were too poor to buy it. So when he came here, he lived the American dream. It's, your story touches my heart because I understand, living through it. And so my daughter approached him, and we're pro-legal immigration. My dad came here legally. And so my daughter told him, said, "Nono, what would you have done if you didn't marry Nonna?" And he goes, "Oh, I'll stay here."
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, we need to share these stories because I think that, again, we need the perspective of the outsiders because we have been so blessed. It's always the case, right? We're so blessed, we have no clue that we're blessed. We need to get reminded. A little persecution with like pretty boy governors is a good thing for the church because it wakes us up. Anyway, thank you for that. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I have a question about, I grew up loving journalism and writing. I really related to your story about being in college and being the artsy type because that was me, right? With my little...
I hope you married a banker.
What's that?
Nothing. It hasn't been financially easy, the writing life,
It has not.
I got this jacket off eBay, so...
Now I'm a
people think I'm joking. No.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Now I'm a first grade teacher, so I'm still poor.
Yeah.
But my question is, a little preface to it is, I grew up loving journalism and loving those people that sought the truth, right? And I'm looking at journalism today, right? And I'm looking at journalists, and something can be so blatantly untrue, but they still, something can be so blatantly true, right? Like riots.
Well, it's right that we're shocked by what has happened to so-called journalism because I've noticed it. Look, the journalistic world roughly since the 60s has been drifting left, but what happened in the last 4 years is staggering. We need to know. My wife and I canceled our subscription to the New York Times when COVID hit, and I have to say, because I literally finally got to the point where I could no longer bear reading the headlines because they were that skewed. Yeah. And I think that's, again, it's a sign of how bad things are, that something that fundamental, it's like your courts, whatever, this is a fundamental thing. And I'm not sure, well, ask your question. I'm sorry, I don't mean to
Well, my question is, will the pendulum ever swing the other way? Like you said, it's just like we're living the 60s all over again. But will we ever come to like some middle ground, or is this just going to be how it's going to be?
The answer is, for sure, nobody knows, but I can tell you it doesn't matter because we know what our job is. Yeah. Our job is to pray and to fast and pray and to work to do what is right. And I have to say that, I believe that we have enough freedom in America. This is why if you don't use your freedom, if you don't vote, wow, shame on you, because what we have is so precious. We still have, the difference between what we have here and what they had in Germany in the 30s is that they didn't have any tradition of this kind of freedom that we have. So it's not such a shock that they were able to make those incredibly horrible mistakes. But what would our excuse be when we have had a tradition and when we have the lesson of Bonhoeffer and Germany of the 30s? They didn't have a lesson like that. We have that lesson. I really believe it's why the Lord called me to write that book. It was not some bright idea I had. But the point is that we are to fight with all our might and main. and we are to trust God, and God commands us to be hopeful. And if we go, it's like the people in the Soviet Gulag, the people in prisons in China, the people in prisons in North Korea. God commands them to rejoice in him always. Now think about that. We never have an excuse not to be hopeful and joyful in the secret presence of Jesus in our lives, and God will deal with the results. So whether we swing back or not, I'm hopeful, but we have to really, really fight. We have to fight as hard as we can and pray as hard as we can, and then the results are in the Lord's hands. It's not about winning, it's about obedience. So, yes, sir.
Hi, so just following up to your French comment. So when you become Christian, are you also French because you have to surrender to God?
I didn't actually, I didn't hear the last part of that. When you become a Christian, what?
Oh, I'm sorry. When you become Christian, do you also become French because you have to surrender to God?
Because I missed this.
Never mind.
Oh, I think I get it.
Okay.
I think I get it. Actually, I got to tell you, I wasn't kidding. In February, I have a book coming out, which is the story of my life until I came to faith, and it's about my parents and a lot of stuff that I shared with you. And I always remember my father would, kind of judge every European nation on how they fought in World War II. That was, the way, right? So he had huge respect for the Germans, even though they were the evil enemy. It's like they're an amazing military might. He had huge respect for the Greeks, who actually did acquit themselves incredibly heroically, and on and on and on. And then you go down the line, the Italians were kind of a joke. And then he came to the French, and he said, the French said, when Hitler, invaded, they said, "Mr. Hitler, right this way." So that's a cheap. Actually, that's I realize that that's not as true as the joke makes it sound. But
sorry.
Thank you for
that wasn't the real
thank you
question.
for helping me to get your joke.
Sure.
It was a really mean-spirited joke, but go ahead. Yeah.
So a lot of my fellow cohorts are kind of conservative millennials.
A lot of your fellow...
cohorts like...
Do you say cohort?
Yes.
I hate that word.
Okay.
Strike that from the record. Go ahead. No, but that's like one of those millennial words, cohort. Like what? I'm sorry. I'm just messing with you now. Go ahead. Stop.
It's Roman.
Stop.
Okay.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
So conservative millennials, right? So
yeah.
They a lot of my friends are, or the people I know are kind of disenfranchised with the Republican kind of what's going on right now politically.
Yeah.
So what's going on? Why are we that way? And then secondly, how do we fix it?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I think that sometimes people just don't get stuff, and there's nothing you can do. I think we need to do whatever we can, but I think, look, I have lost friends over my support of this president, and that actually breaks my heart, because I would never say to somebody, you can't be my friend because you disagree with me. So that's actually telling to me that I would not push somebody away, unless they're nasty or whatever, and I've already effectively ended the friendship. But there are many people on that side that are doing that. And I just think that's interesting, because we're supposed to love our enemies. I also think that a lot of people are, you kind of believe what you want to believe. I mean, there are people that honestly, firmly believe every bad thing you've heard about Trump. Now, if you actually believe those things, I guess, you would think he's the devil or Hitler 2.0, and you'd even vote for somebody as horrible as Joe Biden, because you'd think, well, you couldn't be worse than Trump, right? So, so I don't know what to say other than we just have to, it's like talking about somebody who hates God and is angry at the church. We know what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to do what we're supposed to do, and we know that it's in God's hands. God loves everyone equally, and listen, if I could vote the way I voted and then eventually come to see some things, we need to love people that are different than we are, show them the love of Jesus, and do our best. But there's no magic bullet. We're going through a tough time in this country, and my only hope is that we can kind of hang on, because I think if we can hang on, I think if this president can get reelected, I think if we can have courts that believe in the Constitution, we will be okay. But if we don't, we won't be okay. So I am concerned, and I think that when folks like that have kids or whatever, like, you begin to see some things differently. I don't know, but I just know that we have to be hopeful, positive. We have to pray and do what we can do. Thank you. Yes, sir. Now, I think no, we're not going to have any more room, so the last people in line has to be the last person, because I just realized, he's like, I just got in time. But you're going to be the last questioner, and so there's going to be a lot of pressure on you. You better think. So, and please keep your questions brief, because I do want to get to everybody. So, yes, sir.
Yes, Eric, when I was in high school, there was a famous scientist, engineer who my sister's boyfriend was going to the University of Houston while I was in high school, and I followed the space program all throughout high school, and I was a fan of all of the scientists and engineers, and I was just totally in love with the Apollo space program. Followed it, and my brother, my sister's boyfriend told me, "Hey, Werner von Braun is coming to the University of Houston to give a speech."
Yeah.
And he says, "George, would you like to go?" And of course, I jumped at it, and I idolized this man.
Sure.
And then later on in high school, months later, one of my student friends said, "Hey, George, didn't you know that Werner von Braun was a Nazi, and he worked for Hitler in the World War II effort against the Allies and all that?" And when he told me that, and I finally realized that, all of the idolization that I had for him, it had sunk. In your research, in all the books you've written, has a similar kind of thing happened to you?
With who?
With any of the subjects that you've researched and perhaps
admired. I mean, my view, look, I adore Churchill, but my view of him did dip when I realized how he treated, Bonhoeffer's cohort of people trying to go against, like he kind of gave them the back of his hand, and I thought, wow, that's just, like a black mark in his book. So it's interesting. But the Werner von Braun thing is interesting too, because this is another reason to be a Christian. We live in an extremely dirty world. Mm-hmm. And when you see stuff like that, right, when you think of Churchill and FDR on the stage, on the aircraft carrier or at Yalta with Stalin, you realize we live in a filthy, filthy, broken, sinful world. Yeah. And some of the deals that we have to make are ugly. And so you can imagine, the post-war American leaders thinking, hey, there's some geniuses over there, and if we don't get them, the Soviet Union will get them. And that is true. And so, they made that dirty deal. And so, I think apart from Jesus, it's ugly.
Amen. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
How would you recommend you raise children to be patriotic without raising them in a bubble, or worse, indoctrinating them?
I believe in indoctrination. Yes. Actually, it's kind of funny. That's not really true. But one thing that I have learned, I mean, we just have one daughter. She's 21. But, if I had some things to do over again, it is interesting that parents have tremendous power over their kids, which usually in America they don't exert. And I have seen some parents exert that power and force their kids to do this and that, and it blesses the kids, and the kids later on appreciate it. And I think that, look, you can't, it's kind of like we were talking about religion and faith. You can't force it. We know that. But when you love radically, when you love your kids radically, it's really hard to resist that. It's hard to blow it off. It will haunt them if they go the wrong way. But if you're an overbearing, religious, pharisaical parent, raise your hand if you're one of those parents. Raise your hand. We've got a couple in, I know. You're clearly going to push your kid away from God. So it's a real dance. But I do think, practically speaking, doing everything you can, visit battlefields. There's just a million things you can do to get them to learn history and whatever. And some kids will take to it better than others. But it is a balance. But I think that teaching them history, or maybe getting them out of public school if possible, or taking a really firm hand. And I mean, not everybody can, and there's some great teachers in public schools we know, but we also know it's tough. It's an uphill battle. So that's a non-answer, but a great question. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thanks for being here, and thanks for your ministry. What's your opinion on immigrants that don't hold American ideals? Should they be let in, for example, devout Muslims, where their religion mandates that a country like this shouldn't exist and is evil?
That's a great question, because there are limits to religious liberty, right? In other words, that's the interesting thing about the founders. And so in 1960, when JFK is on the ballot, there were a lot of people that legitimately said, wait a minute, is he the kind of a Catholic who's beholden to the Pope so that he can't? In other words, the idiocy that came out of Senator Feinstein's mouth toward Amy Coney Barrett, nonetheless, has precedent where, when we didn't know if there weren't a lot of Catholics in your world or whatever, you'd say, well, are they gonna enforce what they believe, or are they gonna follow the rule of law and do what they believe? And so religion and religious liberty has limits. I mean, if my religion says that if my daughter kisses the wrong guy, I can kill her, the government will step in and say, no, you can't, and we're not gonna give that to you. Religious liberty only goes so far. And I think that living in New York, seeing a lot of Muslims, you see they love America, and so it's obvious that they have been able to compartmentalize a certain part of their faith or whatever. And I think that's ultimately the question. I would say that most faiths, if you take them to their extreme, would push against the idea of being able to love America. But there's no question that there are tons of cultural Muslims, and I know many of them, and they're cultural Muslims. They love America and whatever, and they don't buy into the radical idea that it has to be a theocracy or Sharia law or anything like that. They're not good with that. So maybe you call them bad Muslims, but the point is that they get it. They understand that what we have is good, and they're not willing to follow the tenets of whatever branch of their faith in that direction. Now, we've got a lot of cultural Christians, too, who don't have a clue what they believe, and they say, well, I'm a Christian, whatever. So it's kind of complicated, but I would say at its core, the Christian faith leads to liberty. In other words, at its core, the Christian faith says you cannot force faith. Now, many Christians have tried to force faith. Many Christians have killed those who don't agree with them. In other words, I'm not saying that Christians haven't done it, but the point is, at its core, the gospel does not mandate that. And as time has passed, I think as we've worked it out more and more and more, we've seen that that is the case. So if you have a Christian who believes in theocracy, you'd say, well, you can't. It doesn't. The Christian faith does not allow for theocracy. But again, there have been Christians who have been guilty of that. So it's kind of complicated. But I do think it's important that we understand people have to assimilate to the American way of life, and it may mean giving up certain tenets of their faith, and that's the question: is where's that line? And as you know, some judge someplace a couple of years ago was saying to somebody who said, I can't really celebrate same-sex marriage, and the judge said, well, tough luck. Being an American means setting that aside. In that case, I would say that judge is wrong, and that's the kind of stuff that we have to figure out. At this point, is where are those lines? Where does religious liberty and every kind of liberty bump up against people's faith? So that's a great question. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I have a point, and then I have a question for you. I just want you all to know that I've dedicated the last 5 years of my life to freedom, faith, and family as a cohort with President Donald J. Trump. I have taken slings and arrows unbelievable to most human beings, but I did it because I saw where we were headed. I have 4 children, so the mom that asks about children, they watch what you do, not do what you say. So lead with a clean heart and good spirit for freedom, faith, and family at all times. For the boy that was talking about the Republican Party, President Trump is taking down the entire Democrat Party as well as getting rid of the dead weight in our Republican Party. He is the least racist president we have had since Abraham Lincoln.
And if you don't believe it, just ask him.
Yes.
Right? My favorite thing that Trump has ever said, I just find him so funny. Like, to me, the funniest thing he's ever said is that I've done more for black people than any president ever, with the possible exception of Abraham Lincoln. And you're like, I think he's joking. I hope he's joking.
But
Anyway, I'm sorry. What's your question,
That's okay.
Rosie?
Lastly, as a suburban woman, we're going to flip California. Get out there. Get people voting. Let's go. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, my question. I'm helping the team. I'm actually meeting Ivanka tomorrow. My number one worry is medical tyranny of our freedom, okay? Because COVID will soon be, you can't go shopping without showing us all of your vaccinations.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can't get on an airplane. You can't
Yeah.
do this. You can't do that. I need suggestions as far as how we can move this ball forward.
Well, the first thing I would say is civil disobedience. Like, you just don't put
Yes.
up with it. Push back. Just totally push back. Here's the issue. If a lot of people push back, there's no way they can enforce it. But if only a few people push back, they can pick us off. That's what they do. And so that's the story in Germany that Chuck Colson would quote the sociologist that they call it the spiral of silence. In other words, if only a few people say anything, then everybody loses the courage to speak, and it gets worse and worse. But the more you speak up and the more you push back, I mean, I was running, I run sometimes, and I was running up Madison Avenue, like early in the COVID thing, and you know, if you're running, you can't run with a mask, like you'll die. So I'm running, and some woman cursed at me, and she's like, put on your effing mask, blah, 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 blah. And because I was raised by crazy Europeans, I stopped, I turned around, and I said, what did you say? I said, don't talk to me that way. You know, in other words, I pushed back. And when you push back, you have to understand, if everybody would do that, she would not do what she did. But most people be like, oh, sorry, and they put the mask on. Right. We have to know what is right and wrong, and we have to stand up for what is right. I didn't slug the woman, okay? But the point is that I made the point that I'm an adult. You don't talk to me that way. You don't curse at me that way. And by the way, you're wrong. I didn't tell her, but by the way, you're wrong. I can't like run and be wearing a mask. I'm not walking, you know, like, but I'm saying that we must have the American spirit. We have to be alive to liberty, and we have to push back. And when people just docilely go along, we have to educate them that we don't do that here. We are free, and if you do not exercise your freedom, you deserve to lose it. And so I'm just convinced that when it comes to stuff like this, I mean, we've got to do a million things. We've got to do stuff like talk to leaders like Ivanka Trump, obviously. We've got to vote. We've got to do everything we can do, but in our own lives. And look, I'm not talking about just being a sawed-off jerk wherever you go, right? But I'm saying that I think Americans kind of are too easygoing sometimes, you know? And I even say, I'm driving with my wife, if somebody like really cuts me off, like really grievously, I will like lean on the horn. And the reason I do that is because I say, if everyone did that when they do that, they would stop doing that. But most Americans are like, oh, I'll let it go, you know, or they have some false idea of grace. You're not blessing that person. If you let them know that was wrong, they won't do it the next time, where they understand that there's a price to pay if you behave that way. But we have to live that out, and we can't, you know, just kind of say like, oh, I just want to get along with everybody. If that's your goal in life, you're not really going to be a particularly heroic person. So thank you for that question. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Eric, for your vision for America, and thanks so many foreigners that come here and see the spirit of America, whether it's Dinesh D'Souza or Colin Gunn and these people that make documentary movies. Thank God for these people.
Or Tocqueville.
Right.
I mean, come on.
The French.
They're like,
right.
what is going on over here? It's amazing. Yeah.
So my question is, do you see us racing towards this tipping point, and is there more hope maybe than we think? For example.
Is there more what?
Hope. Hope.
Hope.
H-O-P-E.
than we think, yeah.
Yes. So when Bloomberg and Koch, the left and the right, both got together recently and said, there's a free speech problem at Yale and at the Ivy Leagues, that gives me hope. When I see
Bloomberg said that?
Bloomberg and Koch.
If a jerk like Bloomberg. No, it's kind of funny that, this is, I joke around. That's the beauty of America, is that somebody you can disagree with on all kinds of stuff, they can get something right and they should be praised for it. And I have to say that that's the kind of leadership that we need. And when people will speak up, people with that kind of power, how many don't speak up? I have to say, at a place like Yale, when the dean Christakis and his wife, a few years ago, they were like cursed out by this like brazen young woman. I thought she should have been expelled on the spot, and the administration should have stood up and said, like, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen here again. You better not do that. They didn't do that, because since 1968 in Columbia University, the craven college administrators, they don't believe in anything. And if the students are really angry, they're like, oh, what do we know? We're just like stupid adults, right? It's the same thing, right? Like white males are stupid, and then in the 60s, like everybody over 30 is stupid, whatever. That is a worldview. That is a Rousseauian worldview. It is utterly false. Every culture in the world knows that the older you are, the more wisdom you're likely to have. And most cultures in world history have understood that. But what's happened since the 60s, and it goes back to Marcuse, and it goes back and back and back. These are just basically wrong ideas, fundamentally illiberal leftism. They don't get that. And so they don't have any real belief, and they don't know how to push back. And I think to myself that that's really up to the church. You have no idea of the butterfly effect. One person doing one thing, you don't know what is going to happen. And I really think that that's one reason that I think that most universities they're dying, and the COVID thing is going to make it much worse. Praise God, because they have done an unbelievably horrible job. They have wasted American money, and they have turned out little Stalinists. And I have to say that it's so in terms of hope, again, it's up to each of us. How much hope do we have? How much hope are we willing to exercise? So thank you. All right, yes, sir.
So my question is, well, remember the question that came up right before him? So it has to do with that, like the lady.
Okay, and if I don't remember that question, does it still have to do with that?
Yes.
Okay.
So the lady that she was talking about that that she thinks that medical they want to take our rights away.
Right.
And then you told her that if lots of people stand up against it, then it's going to go away. But as far as I've seen, so far there aren't lots of people who are standing up against it.
Well, you're right. You're right, and you're not right. It depends where you look. The media is not portraying those people. They're not showing you those people. And I think we have to encourage each other that is the right thing to do. And I also think this is where your ultimate values come into play, right? In other words, notice how they use death. It's like, you're going to die. You're going to die. It's like, yeah, I know I'm going to die. Like, no one who's ever lived has not died. So the only question is, what happens after I die? If I believe in Jesus, then actually he defeated death, and so I get never to die, and so I'm not as afraid of death. But if they can hang that over your head, oh, we're all going to die, we're all going to die. It's fear-mongering. Let's face it, okay? They're talking about particular kinds of death. They don't care about, suicide, people having horrible, it goes on and on and on. So this is a power grab, and we are, as Americans, in a way, for the first time, having to deal with this issue of what happens when somebody hangs this over your head and says, oh, you better do this. Or, so we're having to think for ourselves. We're having to make decisions. And, there's no law against smoking. I don't think smoking is a good idea. But if people want to smoke, they can smoke. There's no law against a lot of things that are bad and dangerous and whatever, and we're free Americans. And I think that we have to figure out that balance. But what they're doing now is they're saying, well, it's about other people. If you don't do this, it'll affect other people and stuff. And so I think we have to kind of work this out. It's not going to be easy, but we need to know that there are people who, maybe they're not even doing it intentionally, it's just their instinct to say, I know what's right, and I'm going to tell you how to behave. And as Americans, we have to say, well, I don't think you're right, and I'm not going to give you the right to tell me how to behave, because this is a free country, and we have to work that out. But if we don't understand what freedom is and how it works, and this is a great lesson for America, because for so long we haven't even had to think about these kinds of things, and we're being forced to think about them. And suddenly you realize what it is to have a really dippy governor, for example. Like in the past, you're kind of like, well, it doesn't make that big of a difference, taxes, whatever. The judgment of a man or woman, if they really lack wisdom, it can suddenly really affect you. And I think that's been good for Americans to understand, like, whoa, I better vote for my mayor, I better vote against that guy or that woman or whatever. And somebody said it earlier, but listen, folks, the idea, this bad theology that many Christians seem to have, that it doesn't matter how they vote, that's from the pit of hell. And if Christians do not vote, honestly, shame on them, because that really is affecting everybody. And we have a responsibility to vote our biblical values. So anyway, I hope I gave some semblance of an answer to your question. I have a sense I didn't.
I didn't ask the question.
Oh, you didn't even ask the question. All right, now it really does have to be a true or false question, or multiple choice. Go ahead.
Okay. So, what should people do to spread what they're doing? I mean, you can stand up to someone and say, no, I'm not going to wear a mask in your shop or something, but people won't see you do that. It's not like somebody's going to film you and put you on Facebook and you're going to go worldwide.
I think there are 100 answers to this. In other words, there's a million things we can do, and everybody has a different calling and different talents and different spheres of influence, and we have to use whatever God has given us. And some people do things on social media. Some people do things just in their family or in their community. So we really have to ask the Lord to lead us in these kinds of things, because there's a million things that each of us can do. But that's a wonderful question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
How you doing, Eric? Love your show. Especially
Thank
when
you.
You got John Smirak.
Smirak's the best.
Yeah.
John Smirak.
Hey,
I didn't even mention that. I have a radio show. I hope, actually, you know what? No joke, because I always forget to say this. I beg you all, please, go to my website, ericmetaxas.com, just my name, ericmetaxas.com, and it says to sign up for my newsletter. Every week, we send out a newsletter with every single one of the videos of these amazing guests that I have. And I promise you, when you get that newsletter, half the time you're going to go, holy cow, I want to hear that one. You might not want to hear all of them, but I promise you, I've had such an array of amazing guests, but you wouldn't know it, and you don't need to go searching and stuff, but please just go to ericmetaxas.com, sign up for the newsletter. If you hate it, you can unsubscribe, but I promise you, we don't abuse it, and I'm dying to spread the message. You know, when I get some great guests, I'm thinking, oh, I just wish everybody knew about this. And of course, all my closest friends and relatives, they're the worst. They do not subscribe to the newsletter. So don't be like them. Don't be like them. Yes, sir.
Yeah, are you done? Okay. So I know you voted for Dukakis. You know what? I got you beat. I voted for Jerry Brown when he had hair because he was dating Linda Rodstand.
Wow.
Yeah.
They're going to tar and feather you. You better get out of here, pal.
Yeah. But what I wanted to ask you is, number one, I thank you for your book, especially if you can keep it. That's probably one of the best things. I use it to teach one of my the classes that I do at church, where we have a little bit of civics in there with the gospel, because that's where our gospel comes from. But the other thing, I want to end on a lighter note. I know you had the pleasure of meeting, obviously, Trump, but you also got to meet Obama, and you did the prayer breakfast. I think it was 2012. So tell us some positive things on both of them, and that's it.
Okay, thank you. In 2012, actually, when you go to ericmetaxas.com, at the bottom, there's just a couple of videos right there, and one of them I give my testimony, and the other one is the National Prayer Breakfast speech that I gave in 2012. And it was an interesting thing because I didn't really, I got to shake his hand, but it's not like we got to exchange any words, but I got to have the entire breakfast, this is like on no sleep, sitting next to Joe Biden. And it was so bizarre because I couldn't sleep that night because I was so nervous about giving the speech, I guess. I don't know. I didn't really feel nervous, but I just didn't sleep. And imagine being like dizzy with fatigue and being plopped down at 7 a.m. next to Joe Biden and being forced to like try to have a conversation. And I so didn't care about anything because I was just so tired that I brought up, I don't know if you remember, but in the Onion parody newspaper, they made a lot of fun of Biden. And so I brought that up. And like there's one great one of him, it shows him washing his Camaro in the White House driveway and ticking off Obama and stuff, like crazy stuff like that. So I think I brought it up, and the funniest thing is that he got like a little annoyed and said, like, it's so obvious I'm not like that. And I thought, like, whoa, like you are, but I'm not gonna ruin our breakfast any further. But it was kind of crazy. But I will say this, and this is a lesson to me and to all of us. When it was time, the White House photographer never took a picture of me with the president. And I kind of thought, what the heck? Like, I'm the main speaker at the prayer breakfast. Like, it would be nice, like, to have a photo with the president. I've never met a president before. Well, at some point, the president decides to kind of go down the row and to meet everybody on the dais who'd been, up there. And when he comes to me, I'm like, I got my phone out. I'm going to take a selfie with the president. Like, I've got to take a picture. I'm here. When am I going to see him again? Not often, not soon. And so I pull out my phone, and this is just, this is interesting to me because I would never, ever vote for Joe Biden. But there was a human moment where in an avuncular way, he says, no, give me that, I got that, let me do that. And, he took the picture of me and Obama. And Jesus commands us to love our enemies, to pray for our enemies, and I think sometimes we get caught up in certain things. And that was a real reminder to me that, we're dealing with human beings made in the image of God, and we've got to be careful. I have to be careful. But it was just interesting because it just showed this human side of him that, he was acting like an uncle and just doing this thing. And it kind of touched me, but I'm not voting for him. So I've actually had the honor of meeting President George W. Bush in his office. He read my Bonhoeffer book and sent me a letter, and I was blown out of the water. And so when I was in Dallas one time, I got to visit with him and chat with him for quite a while. And then, of course, I met Obama that day. But I have met Trump a few times. I don't think he knows who I am. But at the Trump inauguration, there was a church service beforehand, and at the service was sitting Jimmy and Rosalind Carter. And I just couldn't believe it. I ran over, and I was just so excited to meet them because, he was the president of my youth, even though I'm not a fan of his politics either. But he was extremely sweet and stuff. So I feel deeply, deeply honored to have met 4 U.S. President, 5 if you count Millard Fillmore. So thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yes, sir.
Let's hope that works. Thank you for your speech tonight. I really appreciated, particularly the reverent sense of humor.
What do you mean? What?
We could talk about it afterwards.
Well,
Okay, anyway. Something that I've been thinking about and kind of struggling with as regarding Christian convictions in politics and voting and deciding what to vote with or not. We've got kind of two things going on. We've got the freedom that we enjoy in this country, which of course is built on Christian principles and the Christian worldview. And then we've got the responsibility to vote our Christian convictions.
Right.
And how do you've mentioned it with a couple of other people, how do we make those two work together? I mean, an example, gay marriage. We've got two possibilities with dealing with this. At one point it was illegal. Now it's legal nationwide.
Right.
So as Christians, do we, and I'm not talking specifically about this issue, but some principles behind
well, no,
this.
I need a specific. It's complicated. I mean, it's clearly complicated.
We've got these two options. I'm sorry, just so I get the thought out. We've got the option of saying, do we push to make it illegal again?
Right.
Or do we take more of a perspective like, say, a Ben Shapiro, where the government sucks at everything, get them out of the business of marriage altogether? So we've got those two things as a Christian, with the ultimate goal being able to practice the Christian faith.
Sure.
Yeah, how do you make a decision in that case?
On that, I can guarantee you I don't have an answer. I really, I don't know. I think that there are arguments on both sides. Every issue is different. Also, people are called to different things, and I think that you have to decide what battles God has made you to fight.
I agree, and I'm thinking, would you have a principle or two that we could keep in mind in making that kind of
Well, you'd
decision?
have to give me a specific, you mean on that issue there?
On that issue, yeah, because, I mean, that's a big one.
I think probably that's not a battle worth fighting.
Okay.
And I don't think I mean, how do I put this? I think it's so complicated that I shouldn't even comment on it because it is quite complicated. But I just think that you really have to figure out what has God called you to do. And I think, natural law and that kind of stuff would lead you in a certain direction. But, I mean, everybody has limited time and limited, talents and gifts and stuff. And so it's not really like I know the answer to that. There are many things that I consider wrong, but I can't fix all of them. So I sort of have to, figure out what I can do.
No, that's fair. And however God has called you and your own personal convictions may be the best answer. I know.
I think so. I think there's some things where there is no real answer. You can talk and talk and talk, but I don't. On that one, it's just so complicated that I wouldn't know what to say. I think that I know gay people. They know where I stand on that issue, but they know that I love them because everyone I know who doesn't share my faith has lived in some kind of sexual sin or is living in some kind of sexual sin, what I believe is sexual sin. And, I'm not going to shun them or whatever. But at the same time, within the church, we have to be clear on what the scripture says. And so it's tricky. But in terms of what to do on that, that's anybody's guess.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And I knew there wasn't going to be an easy answer.
Thank you. No, it's that's a tough one.
Right.
And this wonderful young man is standing here with the last question. Please be kind.
So if you didn't text me your questions, you missed out. The question that I had for you, I suppose, is one that I've been thinking through with regards to how we as Christians are perceived as our witness in the world and in culture. I want to think through basically in the godlessness of our culture. I'm thinking even back, I know you love history, and I think back to the revolution that started this country, and you contrast it to something like the French Revolution, which was based on the desire for reason without God. And yet I still value reason. And I am interested in seeing, now that our history is being attacked again, how do we as Christians fight against that which is wrong in our culture without, and maybe it's just, I've got to grow a backbone and realize that the culture
That's it.
characterize
No, just kidding.
it, yeah, but
No, this is like the question that this other gentleman just asked. There's really no answer. It's very complicated. It is up to each of us to decide. I mean, look, in the last few years, I have become much more politically vocal. I had made a decision before that, this is not my thing necessarily or whatever, but I think it really depends on the times. I think it depends on your own discernment to try to hear from God, what is God calling me to do? And I really believe that, who was I just talking to today? I was talking to a friend today, and I said, there is no question that I have taken a financial bath by supporting Donald Trump. There were people, churches, schools, whatever, inviting me to speak and whatever, and a lot of that went away. But I thought to myself, well, wait a minute. I write books about people like Bonhoeffer. So what am I going to do? Make my decisions on that kind of stuff? Do I believe that I need to speak up? And by the way, some people are not that vocal, but I guess I came to the point where I became increasingly vocal because, I believe that we are at that tipping point where it makes that difference. So when somebody like a David French or somebody else says, oh, it doesn't matter, you're making a big deal, I think they're totally wrong. I wish they were right. But I think that it's kind of like in a war, you realize this battle is it. We better put all in on this. And if we have to lose 1,000 men, this is the battle. We will lose the war if we don't win this battle. And I think you have to have a discernment about that. And then you have to have a personal discernment about what is God calling me to. And I honestly think that the older you get, the less troubled you are by what people think, in the sense that you will never be able to please everybody. And I think that when I was younger, I still thought, I can please everybody, I'm going to be a good witness, and I can, and you realize, well, there's nobody better than Tim Tebow, and they mocked him for his faith, right? I don't even have to go to the Jesus thing, and I think they crucified him, right? But Tim Tebow and all these other people, they mocked them. And so I think that it is a balance, and I think that maybe the mistake Christians have made is we're either sour moralists, who really are just bad witnesses, or we react so strongly to not wanting to be a sour moralist that we're afraid to have or to express opinions, which is just as bad in the other direction. And I think that, we need to understand. I mean, for example, there are, Tim Keller, whom I love and revere, wrote an article that was published in the New York Times, of course, basically saying that, Christians cannot be beholden to any political party, right? And 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, that was an important statement. Today, it is a misleading cliche. It is no longer correct, but it's the Christian thing to say, right? I mean, if one party is the Nazi party and the other party is the non-Nazi party, the idea that you're going to say, well, Christians are not, we don't worship political idols, and you can vote as you. I think Christians have an obligation to say, excuse me, sir, in this case, we're in a different situation. This is not a choice between Walter Mondale and Ronald Reagan. This is a choice between a party that has over time drifted so far leftward that they are no longer anything like the Democratic Party of previous decades. And how can you ignore that? To ignore that is to put your head in the sand and to pretend that something is true that ain't true. And basically, when I see church leaders do that, it grieves me really deeply, because clearly they know that they're going to pay a huge price if they dare to come out for Trump. That orange bad man, that jughead, that idiot who tweets, you don't want anything to do with him. He'll blow your whole witness, and you've spent decades building up this wonderful reputation. Well, if that's your ultimate value, what can I say? But I really think that, as far as I'm concerned, I just said, hey, God's got my back. I'm going to do what I think is right. And that's what all these heroes I write about have done. And that's what every single Christian is supposed to do. And so I think there are times when we have to be willing either to lose friends or to offend people. We should never want to or don't care about it. But the point is that it is inevitable that there may be times when that happens. And I think we really have to trust God with that. I mean, if you really are showing the love of Jesus and speaking humbly and not setting yourself up in a certain way, so there's so many different, ways to do this, and everybody is different. I mean, there are people that are called to be vocal about something, and there are other people that they're not, and so that's why, unless you have a real relationship with Jesus, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. So you have to let him lead you. I hope that begins to answer what you were asking. You may have something more specific before we go.
A follow-up. Do you think that in our culture, Christians will ever be seen as, I suppose, what we are for as opposed to what we are fighting against?
And that too is like one of those cliches I've heard over the years, and people say it and it gets applause, like, we need to stop being all about what we're against and about what we're for. And people are like, yeah. Like, well, look, I'm against slavery. I'm against butchering the unborn and selling their parts. Should I be ashamed of that? And this is what I'm saying is I think we get all worried, and I think we need to flip it and say, wait a second. The people who are against slavery, you don't think that got pushed back? You don't think that there were 100 arguments like, hey, slavery's been around since the beginning of time, and you're coming in with your religious values and whatever? Shut up. Leave me alone. And Christians said, well, I can't. God compels me to be against slavery. And in the end, we look at them as heroes. And I kind of think that we can't really, I know what you're saying, and it's actually very, very important to me. And I think that the way to that, in a way, is probably at this point more about being muscular Christians rather than, I don't want to offend people, Christians. I think you can go too far in different directions, and I think that because of the moral majority and that kind of stuff, in some ways, maybe we overplayed our hand or we did some things, and then people just react dramatically in the other direction, and they don't want anything to do with politics, and then you open the door to all kinds of horrors, that, reason without God leads to a bloodbath. And so it's just one of those things that I think it's my conviction at this point that it's one thing to be wrong politically or to be to make an idol of politics, but I think we haven't been political enough. The idea that so many Christians didn't vote in the last gubernatorial election, there's no reason that this governor should be the governor. There are enough people who understand that he's a bad choice, but they didn't vote, and now, because of that, we have to clean up the mess. And the mess is churches like this get fined and whatever because they didn't vote. Or maybe because they said, well, politics is beneath me. I'm a Christian. I'm about Jesus. I'm about another kingdom. That's a lot of baloney. You're still here. You're a member of two kingdoms. That's biblical. If Paul says it, I think that's probably pretty biblical, right? So we are dealing with the mess of Christians unwilling to face, just like this president is dealing with the messes that many previous presidents declined to bother with, right? I don't want to deal with China. That's a mess. I'll leave it alone. Let it ride. Oh, well, I don't want to deal with, that problem. I don't want to deal with that problem. Well, when you don't deal with those problems, they grow and grow and grow, and then somebody has to clean up the mess. We would never need a maniac like Donald Trump if the previous presidents had done their jobs. You ever think about that? It's kind of a funny. It's funny, right? I find it funny if George Bush had done a number of things differently, if Clinton had done a number of things differently, if Obama had done a number of things differently, we never would have elected a Donald Trump. But we realized like things are so bad, we need that crazy guy who's gonna do it, because everybody else is kind of like, I don't know, can we do that? I'm afraid. Like I don't want to. You know, I mean, for example, the situation with NATO. He's totally right. Like we're getting ripped off. Like it's no longer 1964. Like the World War II didn't just end, and we better stand up against Russia, and we better unify, and whatever. Like that's 1 billion years ago, and we are still kind of stumbling along like that. And he's enough of a nut to kind of look at it and go, "What? No, this is wrong. This is wrong." And so he does these things, and he offended Merkel and this and that. And I kind of think, who cares? Like George, Herbert Walker Bush was living in another time, and but I mean, like that whole situation was just wrong, and he understands that all the money that we poured into NATO and all that stuff, that's your money. Like he understands, like we don't have free money, that's like your money. I have to justify what we're doing, and so he does something that nobody else did. He did it with Israel. I mean, all of the presidents piously said, "Oh yes, we must move the embassy to Israel." None of them had the courage to do it. That's actually really shameful. That Donald Trump has to be the one to do it. And then finally, the biggest issue is that China, on the left, there's always been a tremendous naivete toward evil and communism. But on the right, speaking of the Koch brothers, there has always been a worship of the free market, not understanding, just like with democracy, you can't have freedom and democracy and you can't have a free market unless you have virtue involved. Because the free market can give me better weapons, the free market can give me better drugs, better pornography, the free market will give me whatever I want. It's not moral, but they kind of act like it's moral and it'll go in the right direction. So they thought, hey, if we just open up China, most favored nation status, who cares if they torture Christians and stuff? It's cool. Like we're going to make a ton of money, and they're going to make money, and they're all going to act like Ben Franklin in a few years because they have a free market, right? So you had naivete on both sides. So this went on and on and on, and a lot of it had to do with greed, with people wanting to make money in China, like the NBA and Nike and whatever. They would do business, obviously, with Nazi Germany or with slave traders. They just want to make money. Like, they don't seem to have any values. They don't care that Uyghur Muslims are being murdered for their organs. I mean, if you have no value except money, what's going to happen? You're going to feed a monster like communist China, which, by the way, is using all of its power to oppress its people, especially its Christians. And then Donald Trump comes in and he looks at the situation and he says, oh, this is really bad. We're getting really ripped off. And he has to do all these crazy things. And all of the prognosticators say, like, oh, what a maniac. Doesn't he understand we're going to have a trade war? We're going to do it. And it really is funny to me because it is an issue of understanding what God is calling you to do now. And I think it has to start with the church. If the church does the right thing and leads, morally speaking, I mean, we ought to have spoken up when, and many did, when we gave China most favored nation status and say, hey, there's a price to pay. They want money, they want to trade with us, they need to change on human rights. They need to do this, they need to do that, and if they don't, no money. But the greed overwhelmed that. And, we realize that as Christians, we have bigger values, more important values than making money. Making money is a good thing. You can do good things with money. But we have to have moral values. And so that's why if the church does not lead on all this stuff, you can't expect the head of the NBA or the head of Nike to get this. But we are supposed to be the conscience of the state, and we're supposed to be the voices that say to those people, you want me to go to NBA games, you want me to buy your sneakers, I will never buy your sneakers if you don't stop using slave labor in China or stop it. In other words, we need to demand these kinds of things. And that was just a very, very long answer. I forgot the question. I apologize. I'm very tired. I'm still in New York time. Thank you so much. Thank all of you. Cooper is going to come up here, I think, and I'm going to be out there to sign books as long as I can stay awake. You really are very kind. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Wasn't that terrific? All right. Well, if you could all have a seat. Eric and his cohort are going to get ready for the book signing. We've so appreciated these family nights. We have another 2 to go. Our ushers are going to be coming forward to take an offering. We appreciate your giving. We like keeping these meetings free. We like always being inclusive and allowing everybody to be involved and everybody coming. Just so to go over next week, the 31st, we are going to have Easy and Josh McDowell. It's going to be a great evening. We always like to stress how these are VAC family nights, and so we love having the families here. And next week is going to be really focused on the families. We're even going to have either a dedicated question line for kids, or take them on 3x5 cards from kids, because Easy and Josh McDowell are both always great, and we're telling them to gear their messages to all ages. All right, so we have some people here who are putting up signs for recall, or not putting up signs, but taking signatures for recalling Newsom. If you'd roll the video, Noah. So my nieces and I went out to dinner the other night, and we really tried to follow Newsom's rules. As you can see, very effective. You know, if we all tweet that at him, maybe he'll use it as his PSA. Or just use it as a PSA to go talk to Dawn and sign the recall. All right, once again going over, yes, there's Dawn. Once again, going over the tables. We got TPUSA and all the awesome swag out there. Huge thanks to Pastor Rob McCoy for bringing Charlie Kirk last week. That was awesome. He was also instrumental in getting Eric here this week. It's always amazing what happens when Rob and Neil and Pastor Mike put their heads together. We get all these awesome speakers here. Again, opt in to the opt-out table. That's what I like to say, opt into the opt-out table. You can learn all the opt-out. Paulette has a table back there with some information. Neil's going to be speaking tomorrow about the propositions at Newark Community Church. He's also going to be speaking at our last VAC family night on the 7th. Where do we go from here? We might not know where we are on the 7th, but we'll see. Win, lose, or draw. He's always got to be ready to give that message on the 7th. And then, let's see. Oh, a bunch of people have been asking about the EBLM shirts. So back by popular demand is the EBLM table back there for t-shirts, buttons, and hats. And so books for Eric are going to be for sale. Mrs. McClure has an awesome little bookshop back there. So you can line up right there along that back wall, get your books, and then you'll see the double doors into the gym. If you can line up, queue up right there in the gym, and then, since we can't go to Disneyland, we'll have the Disneyland back and forths to make you feel like you're at Disneyland until you get into the cafe and you get to meet Eric. Yes, ma'am. Yes, typo, error. It's going to be Saturday the 7th. We accidentally extrapolated out 7 more days from the election, which was not the right date. So it is the 7th. We told Neil we're going to keep him on his toes because he's supposed to tell us where to go from here. But on the 7th, we still might not know. But we'll see. Get out there and vote. One more thing, you can, even if you haven't registered, you can still vote. Just go to the polling place, vote. They'll put it in a provisional ballot envelope, but you can still cast a vote. So go to familynights.org. Pull out your phones. Be sure to register for Eric's newsletter, and then go to familynights.org. Familynights.org will have all the information for next week, for the tacos, which are going to be awesome, for the meet and greet, which will be a great time, and just for the whole event in general. All right, Thank you so much. Be sure to go purchase all of Eric's books and have him autograph them all.